Imagine stumbling onto a grainy television clip from the 1950s, late at night, in that hypnotic lull between wakefulness and dreams. The video is all flicker and haze, the lights on stage bright enough to flatten the performers into two-dimensional silhouettes. You lean in, trying to make sense of who's out there, in those oversized cowboy suits, rhinestones shimmering like lost stars on an old black and white screen. There in the center is a man so small he almost disappears behind his guitar. But there's a dazzling grin on his face, a quick wink at the camera, and suddenly a voice booms out, rich and playful all at once, with a zest that says he's here to have a good time, and he wants you along for the ride. His comedic timing breaks through the decades in an instant, and the crowd's laughter, faint through the static, is as genuine as if you were right there in the front row. That man, the spark of that moment, is Little Jimmy Dickens, a titan of country music who stood only 4 feet 11 inches tall, but somehow filled an entire stage with his exuberance. His life story is part comedy, part heartbreak, part small-town grit, and above all, a demonstration of just how far one can travel with a big dream and an even bigger sense of humor. He was born James Cecil Dickens on December 19, 1920, in a modest mining community called Bolt, West Virginia. Nestled among the Appalachian mountains and hollers, Bolt wasn't the kind of place that regularly turned out national celebrities. In fact, the Dickens family was fighting every day just to put food on the table. There were 13 children altogether, a brood so large and chaotic that at times you could lose track of who was who if you blinked. His father was a coal miner spending long hours underground in dangerous conditions for meager pay, and his mother managed the household with steady hands, boundless patience, and resourcefulness that only an Appalachian matriarch could muster. Their home was rudimentary, often described as a small house with a little insulation, sometimes even using roofing paper to keep out the elements. In that environment, money was tight, but the family was bound together by a tough, do-it-yourself spirit. Among all those siblings, young James, whom everyone simply called Jimmy, had a spark. It wasn't just his flamboyant sense of humor, or the fact that he was notably shorter than everyone else. It was something intangible, a spark of performance that would later become a flame. From his earliest recollections, Jimmy was entranced by the music that surrounded him. West Virginia in the 1920s and 1930s might have been remote, but it wasn't silent. People sang on porches, in churches, at local gatherings. Music cut through the drudgery of mine life, softened the edges of the Great Depression, and offered moments of joy. Jimmy latched on to that. He'd try to sing along with the folk tunes and early country songs that drifted through the region, his small frame practically vibrating with energy whenever he heard a guitar strum. It might seem improbable that a kid from Bolt would end up a country superstar, but improbable journeys often begin with a single step. For Jimmy Dickens, that first step happened on a local radio station, WJLS, in nearby Beckley, West Virginia. He was just 16 years old, still in the mid-1930s, and the station paid him a grand total of $1 per performance. That wasn't a lot, but it might as well have been a kingdom's fortune to a teenager discovering that people would pay to hear him sing, and just as importantly, to hear him joke around in that lively, crackling voice of his. Those small radio gigs opened his eyes to a bigger horizon. He'd stand in front of the microphone, give a spirited performance, and afterwards, local listeners or station staff would gush about how entertaining he was. He was only about 5 feet tall at the time, though he'd never grow much taller, and wore his short stature almost like a badge of honor. He quickly realized he could play off his height for comedic effect, transforming a potential insecurity into a marketing advantage. He had always been teased for being tiny, and sometimes it hurt, but from the moment he started performing, he found a way to own it. The moniker Little Jimmy Dickens would become his professional calling card. Though he enrolled briefly at West Virginia University with the vague notion of furthering his education, the lure of music was impossible to resist. He left school to pursue his dream, a bold move that worried his parents but also felt inevitable, especially for a teenager who had the bug for performing. Over the next few years, he barnstormed around smaller cities, singing wherever he could. That journey, while precarious, set him on a path that would eventually stretch across more than half a century of performances on the most famous country music stage in the world. By the late 1940s, the dust of World War II had settled, and America was hungry for entertainment. Country music was exploding, with new stars popping up almost monthly. Enter Roy Acuff, an influential singer and fiddler who by that time was already considered a legend in his own right. He heard Jimmy performing in Saginaw, Michigan at station WOLS, noticed his indefatigable energy, and recognized something special. Acuff was so impressed that he brought Jimmy to Nashville, introducing him to powerful record industry folks, and eventually helping him sign with Columbia Records in 1948. That was the big break. For a coal miner's kid from Bolt, West Virginia, to sign with a major label in Nashville was akin to a fairy tale, except Jimmy Dickens wasn't the type to see it that way. He took it all in stride, excited but also ready to prove he belonged. He wasted no time. By 1949, he had his first real hit, Take an Old Cold Tatter and Wait, a comedic tune that soared to number 1. 7 on the country charts, it showcased all the hallmarks of Jimmy's style: playful lyrics, a down-home perspective, and a wink at the audience that said, "We're all in on this joke together." That track not only launched him nationally, but also introduced the comedic edge that would become his brand. Where others in country music might have leaned on heartbreak songs or cowboy ballads, Jimmy leaned on humor, delivering lyrics that both poked fun at and celebrated the simple joys of rural life. He was short in stature, but large in personality, and fans across the country took to him immediately. That same year, 1949, was pivotal for another reason. He officially joined the Grand Ole Opry. Now, the Grand Ole Opry was, and still is, the epicenter of country music. A revered radio show beamed out of Nashville every week since the 1920s. Becoming a member was the dream of countless country hopefuls, and Little Jimmy Dickens made that dream come true. He was small enough to be dwarfed by the stage's sweeping lights, but the moment he stepped forward, he commanded attention. The audience adored him, and the other Opry stars, legends like Minnie Pearl, Ernest Tubb, and Roy Acuff, welcomed him into their family. It was an elite fraternity, and Dickens's membership would go on to last an astonishing 67 years, making him the longest-serving member in the Opry's history. The early 1950s saw a flurry of hits that solidified Jimmy's comedic country style. Songs like Country Boy in 1949, another number 7 hit, Asleepin' at the Foot of the Bed in 1950, number 6, and Hillbilly Fever in 1950, number 9, all reinforced his persona, a mischievous, lovable scamp who blended old-time country instrumentation with lyrics that could send entire audiences into fits of laughter. Yet beneath the light-hearted themes, there was always a ring of authenticity. He was singing about a life he knew. Growing up poor, with a big family in West Virginia, gave him more than enough fodder for comedic observation. And by the mid-1950s, Dickens wasn't just a voice on the radio, he was a spectacle. He began wearing rhinestone-studded suits, flashy, jeweled outfits that caught the spotlight in ways no plain denim or flannel ever could. Nudie Cone, The famous tailor who outfitted so many country stars in that era created custom suits for Dickens, accentuating his short stature with wild, eye-popping designs. Audiences ate it up. Between the suits, the jokes, and the lively music, Dickens became a highlight of any show he appeared in. But if the 1950s established him as a comedic mainstay, the mid-1960s catapulted him to a new level of mainstream fame. In 1965, he released a novelty song called "May the Bird of Paradise Fly Up Your Nose." On paper, the title might have seemed too silly to make much of a splash, but the track exploded. It soared to number one on the country charts, and even crossed over to number 15 on the pop charts, selling over 1 million copies. The comedic hook, combined with Dickens' impeccable timing and vibrant persona, made the song irresistible. Suddenly, Little Jimmy Dickens wasn't just a star in the world of country music, he was a name recognized by casual pop listeners across America. People who'd never heard of Bolt, West Virginia, were humming a tune about a bird of paradise and chuckling at how Dickens had turned comedic country into a phenomenon. The record earned a Grammy nomination in 1966, and though he didn't take home the trophy, the mere nomination signaled that he'd broken through the boundaries of what many considered hillbilly music. Amid this success, Dickens became a regular face on television. He appeared on shows like Ozark Jubilee in the mid-1950s, performed on The Tonight Show for Johnny Carson's massive late-night audience, and hopped around the country on tours like the Philip Morris Country Music Show. He shared stages and spotlights with some of the biggest names in country music, from Carl Smith to Lefty Frizzle. Indeed, Dickens was instrumental in bringing the joy of country music to mainstream America, showing that it wasn't all tears and sorrow. There was a comedic, upbeat side, too. He embraced that role wholeheartedly, bouncing around the stage in his rhinestones, cracking jokes between songs, and forever offering that wide grin that said, "Aren't we having fun?" Behind all that laughter and sparkle, though, real life was happening. Dickens was married several times, particularly during the whirlwind years of his career's ascent. His first marriage in 1944 was to Connie Chapman, but the strain of life on the road and the relentless schedule proved too much. They had no children and divorced in 1955. Almost immediately, Dickens married again, this time to Ernestine Stanley, embarking on a union that would bring him 2 daughters, Pamela, born in 1956, and Lisa, born in 1958. Though Dickens loved his daughters dearly, the pressure cooker of fame and touring schedules took its toll, and this second marriage ended in 1968. During some of these peak years, he was away from home for weeks or months at a time, fueling rumors of marital discord and personal stress that overshadowed his cheery, on-stage persona. He remarried one final time in 1971, this time to Mona Gale Evans. By then he was 50 years old, with 2 grown daughters, and a career that was still robust, though somewhat out of the blazing spotlight of his earlier hits. He and Mona didn't have children, but she became his companion on the road and at the Opry, standing by him through the ups and downs of an artist's life. They settled in Hendersonville, Tennessee, not far from Nashville, an area that had become home to many country stars who sought a peaceful life near the hub of their industry. Friends and family noted that Mona provided a stable center for Jimmy, giving him the emotional grounding he might have lacked during the earlier stages of his career. Though he never abandoned his comedic instincts and love for performing, he did seem calmer, more at peace in his personal life. While the 1970s and 1980s saw Dickens shift from the front lines of chart success toward a steadier presence at the Grand Ole Opry, His popularity within the country music community never waned. He played up to 200 shows a year into his 80s and early 90s, an incredible feat for anyone, let alone someone who had always been physically smaller. His trademark introduction, "I'm Little Jimmy Dickens, or what's left of him," never failed to draw a laugh. The Opry crowd loved him like a favorite uncle, greeting each new comedic remark with a roar. He had long since embraced his stage nickname, Tater, a reference to his early hit, Take an Old Cold Tater, and he'd pepper his performances with jokes about his height, his old age, or anything else that might spark good-natured laughter. But the highlight was usually the music, quick-paced, entertaining songs that allowed him to show off the voice that, while not operatic, was endearing, energetic, and unmistakably country. In 1983, the industry bestowed upon him one of its highest honors, induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame. The accolade recognized not only his string of hits and comedic novelty songs, but also the role he played in popularizing the humor and showmanship of country music, proving that the genre was about more than heartbreak anthems and cowboy laments. It was about camaraderie, good times, and real human connection. His plaque in the Hall of Fame lauds him as a tradition keeper who used humor to make country music accessible. And it's true, few artists had such a disarming effect on audiences. One minute they were guffawing at a one-liner, the next they were tapping their feet to a spirited banjo riff, and then, before they realized it, they were head over heels for country music. As the decades rolled on, Dickens became something of an icon among younger generations of country artists. Brad Paisley, Vince Gill, Carrie Underwood, and other modern-day stars admired him not just for his longevity, but for his genuine kindness. Jimmy Dickens was quick to offer mentorship or a friendly word, never behaving like a star above the fray. He'd appear in comedy skits on the Grand Ole Opry or cameo in modern country music videos, always up for a laugh. True to his comedic persona, he embraced technology and the ways the music industry evolved. He'd joke about how he was old enough to remember radio before television. Yet here he was, showing up in YouTube clips. Even in his late 80s, he exuded the same impish sparkle that had captured audiences decades earlier. By 2014, he was slowing down physically, but he still managed to appear on the Opry stage for his 94th birthday. That event was emblematic of who he was, a performer who never truly hung up his hat because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. Backstage, he'd crack jokes about how he had outlived nearly all the country legends he started with, and yet somehow he was still wearing rhinestones and delighting new fans. The ravages of age, however, are inevitable. After that landmark birthday, Dickens suffered a stroke and experienced a serious fall, leading to complications that eventually placed him in the hospital. Despite this decline, his sense of humor didn't desert him. Nurses and visitors would later report that he was still joking about Bird of Paradise, the tune that had catapulted him to mainstream fame back in 1965, even in those final days. He passed away on January 2, 2015, at the age of 94, his heart giving out after a life lived, quite literally, on center stage. The loss sent a ripple through the country music world. For many, it felt like losing a beloved grandparent who had told the best stories and made everyone laugh even in hard times. The Grand Ole Opry held a memorial service on January 10, 2015, where thousands gathered to pay tribute. Vince Gill and Carrie Underwood performed in his honor, their tears mingling with smiles as they remembered the man who had made the Opry a livelier, friendlier place for nearly 7 decades. It was fitting that he was laid to rest at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, a cemetery that holds the remains of multiple country greats. His funeral service featured personal anecdotes from fellow musicians who recalled everything from hilarious one-liners during late-night tours to surprisingly wise bits of career advice. Even in death, Little Jimmy Dickens was a unifying force, bringing people together in gratitude for a life well lived. But the story doesn't end there. His hometown of Bolt, West Virginia, decided to honor its most famous son by renaming a local road Little Jimmy Dickens Parkway, ensuring that future generations would see his name and perhaps ask who he was, leading to a wonderful lesson about small beginnings and boundless ambition. A 2023 PBS documentary delved deep into his life, chronicling how he brought comedic novelty songs to mainstream country and shaped how performers interacted with audiences. Featuring interviews with historians, family members, and fellow musicians, it painted a portrait of a man who was unstoppable, who turned a meager start and a diminutive physique into a novelty that never wore out its welcome. Meanwhile, Dickens's two daughters, Pamela and Lisa, preserved many of his sparkling rhinestone outfits at the Grand Ole Opry Museum. They remain a testament to a style of showmanship that few have ever matched. Walk into that exhibit and you'll see the mannequins for the suits, each one glittering with thousands of stones, and realize just how small the garments truly are. Yet in your mind's eye, you might also see them brought to life on stage, worn by a man who stood tall in spirit, overshadowing even the biggest stage lights with his unstoppable cheer and comedic wit. That's the legend of Little Jimmy Dickens, or Tater, or simply Jimmy. Take your pick. He was part clown, part crooner, part unstoppable force of comedic charm. In the end, his life proved that country music has room for everyone, tall or short, shy or outrageous, heartbreak crooner, or comedic maestro. And it proved that a boy from a coal mining family in West Virginia could spin a small start into a magnificent odyssey, carrying an entire nation's smiles on his shoulders. Maybe the best way to honor him is to take a page from his songbook. The next time life hands you a challenge, serve up a hearty helping of humor, put on the brightest outfit in your closet, and walk on stage like you're exactly where you're meant to be. After all, if a 4'11" Tater can become a legendary giant of the Grand Ole Opry, who's to say what's possible for the rest of us? Just tip your hat, wink at the crowd, and let the laughter guide you forward. Little Jimmy Dickens would have wanted it that way.